Hello guys, in this video I'm going to give you a basic overview of 3D modeling and SelfCAD in particular. To make this faster, I'll start with a basic presentation explaining some basic details, and then we'll move on to live editing in the application. So let's get started. Over here you can see that there is a concept of creating objects in multiple different ways. One way of creating objects is by thinking about them as blocks, as standard type of objects, similar to any other industry. For example, in woodworking, you would have kind of 2x4s, 2x6s, plywoods, and so on and so forth. When it comes to 3D modeling, you also have basic objects displayed over here on this panel, and you can use them in its most basic form by simply dragging and dropping, or you can click in each of them to customize. That will allow you to add much more details. And further, we'll discuss a little more about these. If you see over here, this is where we move on to the most advanced. So in the top part, these are the just basic objects. Over here, you have more custom things. In this case, it's called a shape generator, where you have the settings, similar settings that is available when you click on each of them, but in this case it allows you to add a few segments and create real custom shapes. So for example, the same shape can create something like this on top or something over here on the bottom, and so on. And then you have nut and screw, spiral, and gears, so it gives you a lot more flexibility with basic shapes. When you create basic shapes, you can use them in multiple ways. You can use them by stitching together a few shapes, and we have a tool called Stitch and Scoop. You can combine, you can subtract, and two other type of operations you can do. Or you can use them in its basic form in simply deleting pieces. If you want to delete a piece, over here you see it's called Polygon. You select this, where you activate this by clicking here, and then you select the top, you delete them, and then you kind of drag and drop and position other spheres over here to customize this. We'll go in the live application. I'll demonstrate more details about this way of selecting, and we'll discuss this later. But for now, you can see the most basic way. You select something, you add something, and then moving on, you can kind of have something adding textures. We can have a standard list of textures, or if you choose custom, you have the option to upload. You see load image, you can load your own texture. In this case, we loaded a waffle texture to make it look like an ice cream cone, and we colored the spheres, so you kind of have an ice cream. It takes like 2 minutes to create an object like this. That's kind of the most elementary way of working with stuff. Another elementary way, when I say elementary way, it's not that it's not really advanced what you can create with it, but in a sense of the need of 3D modeling expertise. So if you think about the basic objects and what you have done over here in the previous two slides, you kind of just work with standard shapes and you customize it with very, very basic tools, elementary tools, and you don't really need to understand a lot about how the object is made of and its topology that we will discuss later. In a similar way, in a sense, you have image to 3D, which is a unique tool to SelfCAD, where you can upload an image. In this example, we used an airplane image, and you can see this can be converted based on the settings to multiple different outputs. It could be converted to an object like this sticking out while maintaining the rectangular shape, its bounding shape. You can create something like this. You can create just the cutout piece, just this piece, and some other settings over here. Then we have another way of creating objects, where instead of working with very basic shapes and standard shapes that I discussed before, and that's actually called primitives. So instead of working with these primitives, you kind of start creating your shape yourself. In this case, SelfCAD has a very unique tool called freehand drawing, and in that case you can draw things that are kind of solid. You can think about it, something that you want to draw, and then you can switch it, simple toggle, to erase mode, where you start using it as an eraser, and then you can use the same tools. So in this particular tool, you have also standard shapes like circles, rectangles, and so on, splines, lines. In this particular case, with this example, with this bike, we draw kind of, this was basic shapes. You can see circles, and then a little bit lines, or this is probably a spline used. And then you drew the inner parts with an eraser mode using the same type of drawings, And after you finalize that, it takes very quick. And sometimes you can use, there's something called a reference image. So you can upload an image and simply trace it, the same you would do with any 2D software that can trace images. And then once you click finalize, it creates something like this. And there's a setting over there that's called height setting that tells you how thick this will become. And you can actually even make it 0. In that case, it will become a profile, which I will discuss later. Moving on, this is where we have the more 3D sketch. This is more traditional to other CAD software where you create things, a profile. So let me explain what a profile is. The concept of a profile is, unlike the previous shapes, everything we discussed before, you are dealing with meshes, real objects. You are dealing with objects that are actually real, and those eventually will be 3D printed or anything else you want to do with it. When you think about the profile, it's something that you create this to be used for something else. A good analogy would be kind of a mold. It could be used in construction. For example, you want to pour concrete, you would put some mold, something around that you would then use to pour the concrete in, and then you would throw away, remove the mold itself. In the same way in manufacturing actual objects, there are different type of molds and so on in casting. In a similar way, you create something that you will then use to create other objects from it. So with this particular example, you see we sketched a house, which takes like a minute to sketch something like this using the 3D sketch drawing. And then there's a tool called fill polygons, which will actually fill this. And when it fills this, it maintains the structure. For example, you can then select these pieces, you can remove them, and then you can add thickness to add the thickness to the walls, which we will discuss later in details. In a similar sense, creating profiles using the same tool, 3D Sketch, you can create very nice drawings. In this case, we used a spline drawing, and then we used a tool called Revolve, which will take this and it will revolve that. And in Revolve, there's many settings. In this case, we showed an example where you revolve 360 degrees, a kind of complete circle, or you can make it half. But the only thing, kind of limitation, or not limitation really, but the way this tool is working is the revolution, whichever, if it's 360 degree or kind of whatever degree this is, you would have the same consistency throughout the entire roundness, the way it revolves. Meaning, the details that you have, you can have in the height, you see as many details we have over here, demonstrated that it's kind of copying this shape, but over here, the entire thing would be the same. You can make it more or less smooth. Example over here, you see a little bit choppiness. There's a setting for the smoothness, so you can make it more or less smooth. But other than that, the entire shape around will have the same shape. You can't have it one side would look like one shape, the other side like another shape, because this particular thing will be revolved around and kind of extrude, which you will see later, the way it will create the entire shape. Using the same tool, if you want to create something with more details in the height and more complex structures, you can see with an example, there's a tool called Loft. And in Loft, you can see over here where instead of having one object like over here and revolve it, you actually create a series of profiles. In this case, we created multiple profiles. This was actually originally circular. We used some of our sketch editing tools, which maybe I'll have a chance to show it later, to actually it was loop selection with skipped one and then scale it to create this organic kind of shape. And then when we select all of them, we lofted to create this. And the idea here is you give it a flow. You say, for example, you want this to be the first, and then it moves down, then it moves up. So you have a list of profiles and you give it a direction how it will work, and it creates this amazing shape where you can see, because it has all of these dents, Revolve wouldn't be good, but Loft is amazing for this. And Loft can also be used to bridge between objects, and we'll go in more detail in individual tools as discussing individual tools, but this is just a basic overview to give the idea. Another way of using the same idea profiles is follow path. Follow path is a tool that is versatile. It can also be used for other purposes, kind of copying objects, kind of like you want to create a lawn, let's say a garden with a lot of trees around. You can create a path and then copy and spaced out a lot of trees along the path. But it can also be used in a sense creating objects, like in this case where we created a simple pay-per-click profile, then we created a small circle, and then we made it to follow path that will follow it, and we'll make it something like this. Obviously, it could be used in much more complex things, and this is kind of the wild card. You can create a lot of very interesting things with this tool, but they all have in common the same thing, where the profile itself is just used to create the object, and then you can discard, delete the profile. You're left with the mesh, which is something you want to print. In 3D drawing, sketch drawing, there's some other tools. One of them is you can draw on an object and it will automatically project, rotate. So in this case, you can see we kind of drew, it's hard to see here in image a little bit, the text coffee on a coffee cup, and will automatically project around that. And maybe we'll have a chance to show how this works a little bit later. Then here comes the topology, and this is very important when it comes to modeling. There are different ways of modeling, but one of the most common ways to create organic shapes is using topology. What this is, when you look at a basic object, the way we shown the first slide over here, you don't really see what this is made of. This has less detail, so you kind of see a little bit the edges, but in some shapes like a cube or some other basic shapes, or if you add more smoothness to this, you wouldn't even see it's made up of pieces. It would look like one solid. Kind of you see over here in the top, on this top, you don't really see this is made up of pieces. It looks like one solid piece. And when you deal with these type of modeling, you don't really need to know that. But when you're going to the more advanced features and modeling, you need to understand the topology. And that is that an object that it looks, there's different ways we can visualize something. You can visualize something in its basic way without showing the details how it's made up, or you can visualize something wireframe or in a combination. In this example, it's a combination. So what is wireframe? Wireframe shows you the details. You can think about it in a way that you have tiles. You can have a strip of tiles, some sort of like these tiles that is used to lay down in bathrooms and so on, where you have like a grid structure with a lot of tiles on it, and they're stitched together with some kind of strings. In this case, every object is created, every mesh, regardless which software you're using. At the end of the day, if you're going to export an STL or any other standard format, they will be made up, especially those used for 3D printing, they will be made up of a mesh. And a mesh consists of pieces, and the pieces is limited to either triangles or rectangles. For 3D printing and most standard format like STL, there are always triangles. In SelfCAD, we can support both. For 3D modeling, sometimes you want to use rectangles, but when you export them, we always convert them to triangles. But nevertheless, depending on how many details they have, how they consist, this gives you flexibility. And this is what we demonstrate over here, where you can see we have an object, this is a cube, just looked in a flat way. You can see the depth from it. Over here, you can see it a little bit better. And if I'm going to bend this, you can see that the bend is only bending where we have this split, because you cannot bend something that has nothing, no details. Think about it in a way, if you're going to draw, let's say, a circle, follow a pen, a circle drawing, you want to follow it with a pen, you kind of need to create a lot of very small segments to follow it. If you look at it, especially from afar, it may look a very solid circle, but in reality, it's made of a lot of small segments. If you are limited, let's say, to 4 segments, regardless if you follow a circle or not, it will end up being a rectangle. And if you have only 3 segments, it will be a triangle. In a similar way, these objects are made of a lot of small details, and the more details they have, the more flexibility they give you. So if you're going to bend something, if you have very limited details, this will be limited in bending. Over here you can see we took the same cube and added more details to it using the resolution tool or some other tools, and then you can see this is kind of bending nicely. Over here you can see when we overdid it, unnecessary details. We did it too much. And why is this a problem? This is a problem because the more details you add, it actually adds to the size of the object, in a sense of the way we describe the object in the STL file, or the way your 3D printer gets it in G-code, whatever we do. And if it's unnecessary, it makes it very heavy for other machines to work with. So in 3D modeling, there's a concept of low poly modeling. There's very popular, and that's needed when you're going to design for games or anything else that needs to work with your digital object. It needs to be as limited in size as possible. And we have unique tools that maybe I'll have a chance to discuss in the live session. And this is where we need to kind of play with the details. But the most important understanding is that once you have a topology, you can use that in many ways. You can use them with some automated tools like bending, or you can manually do it. Think about it, you can select this point and stretch it, or you can select this point and stretch it, or you can take this entire thing and give it a different size, scale it, or select the face and scale it, or stretch it, move it, rotate it, and those kind of where you start modeling. I've seen people model very, very complex objects just by playing with topology. Over here is where you have the details like how you select things, and this shows you like when you have a topology, there's a difference between a polygon is kind of, you see over this, is made up of small triangles, faces, and we show over here what has been selected. If you select the faces, you will select every small piece. This has a dent over here, it's a bend, it's a little bit further out. So this is kind of like a polygon is something that is completely flat, where a face is also flat, but it's limited to a triangle or a rectangle. And this may select a list of, regardless how many polygons, how many faces are inside, as long as the entire thing is flat. In SelfCAD, there's actually a tolerance setting that can make it, even if it's not completely flat, you still want to select them, you can play with that. But in the most basic format, a polygon is something that's complete flat. An edge is where you select kind of this, you want to modify this, and a vertex is kind of the point. And we activate this from this self-explanatory tool where this activates a polygon, this a vertex, and over here you click, you select an edge. Now we'll move on a little bit more detail to show something real, and hopefully you will understand that everything we said a little bit more better. So I'm moving on to the application. I'll delete everything I have over here, and I'll start modeling something relatively basic, but should teach a lot what I just explained. So I'll go to 3D shape. In this case, I'm going to click on it. So instead of giving me a cube, because I made this setting over here, it will give me something like this. And I have the width is 300, the height would be 10. And that will be important later to remember that. And then the depth is 200. So I'm going to finalize this. When I finalize this, it will put it by default in the center of the screen. That's also sometimes important. And then I'm going to make this into a custom table. So in order to make it a custom table, I want to round this and I want to round this, and I'll show you later as we go. So first let's take a look over here. We see the details. This has been created with the most basic details. If we're going to go to wireframe, you see the structure. It has basically nothing inside, just these details. Wireframe plus mesh, this is what I like to work with. You see this, I think this was the first that I was. If you look over here, on this way, you see nothing, you don't see the details. So I like to work on this. Some cases the others are better. Now if I'm going to select this to round, this will be my first objective. I'm clicking on this edge, and I'm going to click over here, you can see, and I'm going to select this. And I'm going to rotate the other side, and I'm selecting over here. And you can see over here, as we selected updates, we have 2 edges out of 12 selected, because I'm working now with edges. I'm simply going to rotate and select the other edges, so one more left to go, like this. Now I'll go to a tool that it's called fillet, and it's self-explanatory. You can see this will going to round, and I'm going to round that. Let me first preview this to show you. This is the concept where the amount of details depends. So I'm going to, the intensity is kind of like how far out this would be, but the level is the amount of details. And even if it's a rounded function, if it has only 2 segments, it will look like this. So I'm going to increase that to 10. I'm going to make the segments 10. Now you see it gets rounded. So I'm going to finalize this. And now you see we have this nice rounded thing. Another very important thing, especially when it comes to 3D printing, that objects must be manifold. I'm not going to go in now to the exact details, but what this means in the most basic way, that it must have a consistent structure, that everything closes and it's watertight and so on and so forth. So whenever we created this, in order to keep the object manifold with all of these segments, we needed to create this additional segment. So now in addition to these, we also have segments over here. And now you can see when I'm selecting faces over here, this will select kind of those type of faces. It's already different type of triangles. So now what I want to do, I want to round this. And we have a function called round objects. This will round everything. So I don't want that. I want to round only these pieces and also these. But even if I round this, because they kind of share the same edge over here, it will kind of overlap, not overlap, it will kind of go out and affect a little bit this as well. So in order to avoid that, I'm going to select these and isolate them. I'll show you how I do it. But because it has so many pieces, I'm going to switch over here to polygon. You see over here on top, I just switched to polygon, and now this acts as a polygon. The same thing over here will act as a polygon. And now you can see I can select this entire thing. I'm going to go do the same thing and select the bottom because it has the same structure. And now we're going to go to another tool that it's called inset. Inset will allow me to move this a little bit, but you see over here, this gives me, let's make it for 5. This will where how far in I want this to inset. But you see it started giving me a little bit strange results, and this is because things have to do in the direction they are going, and over here I have two directions, the direction from top and bottom, so it kind of makes it distorted. So I'm going to make it over here separate. Once I make separate, this looks beautifully. So once I do this, I'm going to finalize, and now you see the color yellow. That's what I've chosen for selection, and that's the default. But this is kind of shows you what we have isolated. Now you can see also when I'm going to go to face selection, I'm gonna, it asks me if I want to cancel. Okay, so let me first show you what I want to show. The basic thing over here is done. So now I'm going to deselect, just click over here to deselect. By default, we always select what you have worked with. So this was selected. But you see now, even if we created this cut, the polygon will still select everything. So I'm going to go back to my face. And now you see I can select these or these faces we just created. But if I want to round this, I want to select now this entire thing, and this will take a lot of time to do. So we have a very interesting tool, and over here you see we have a selection that's advanced selection. And in this case, this will always have different settings depending on what you have. If you're on polygon, if you're on faces, if you're on edges and vertices, it's always different settings. In this case over here, I'm looking for the loop selection. And loop selection and SelfCAD can select a range. For example, if I want to select from here till here, this selects this range. But in this particular case, I want to select the entire loop. So I simply click this on its neighbor and select the entire loop. And now once I have these selected, I'm going to go to modify again, and I'll go to round object. And now I'm going to set it to number 3, should be fine. And I'm going to preview. Number 3, let's preview this. And finalize this. Okay. So now you see we created, okay, so I clicked too quick to preview. I had to finalize it first. Okay, so now you see we created all of these details, and this is rounded perfectly fine, as you can see. But the problem here is that we added a little extra details that we don't need. So you see we're up to almost 14,000 faces. And this is where it comes into a high poly model. We're trying to keep something low poly. So this is where you're going to see over here, we have something called resolution. Resolution could be adding details or removing details. In this case, I want to remove it, so I make resolution 0. And you can see over here, I'm going to finalize this. You can see we brought it down from almost 14,000 to less than 9,000. Kind of like what, a 30% reduction or something like that. And the object still looks perfectly fine. As you can see over here, this is nice. And I click now over here to deselect this, move around, so you can see the object is nicely rounded, and so on. Okay, so now I'm going to add legs to this table. So in order to do this, I'm going to show the 3D sketch. So to do this, I want to draw on top of this. I'm going to set this opacity to 50 so I can look through it. And I'm going to go over here to set it to top view so I can see what I'm doing. So if I enter my 3D sketch now, you see we have a lot of settings over here. We have over here a drop down, there's plane settings, profile, precision. In plane settings, there's different planes you can choose, which plane you want. In this case, I want to use the top bottom plane, this plane. But I can't use this setting because if you remember, the height of this was 10, and this plane is on the floor, so not 10. So I can type in simply here 10, in this case if I know the value, or in cases I don't know, I simply click on this and I snap it to this, and you see automatically it typed in 10. So now I'm going to draw over here, I want to draw the legs. What I'm going to use a circle drawing, but you see the edges is set to 8, so it wouldn't be a complete circle. We can set the edges, and I'm also going to set symmetry on. And the symmetry by default X, that's what I want. So if I'm going to draw over here, it will create symmetry. But this is not, it's difficult to get it precise. So I'm going to go now to my precision setting, and I'm going to set grid vertices. And this is why I needed to have the opacity to look through, because I actually want to use my grid as a helper. So now I'm going to snap to the grid vertices and start dragging. And while it's dragging, I'm typing in 20. That's the size that I want to make, and I click enter. So now this is a size of 20, entered. And you see, because I had the symmetry on, it duplicated the same thing over here. I can repeat now the same process for the legs over here and snap it to this, and then start typing in 20 and hit enter. and now you get it over here. This actually seemed I clicked something wrong. It wasn't 20. So let me just redo this. Oh, what do I do over here? Okay, 20. Okay, so now you go. So now I'm done with this. I want to create now a center, and I want this to be a separate profile. You can see over here, this shows you profile 1. We always name things automatically what it is. You can always rename. So this is called mesh 7. You can type in, change the name, and same thing with this. But because this was a mesh, it's by default named mesh. And I guess it's 7th mesh that I do now. And same thing, profile is now the first that I do. So it shows me 1. But you can always rename them, but it gives you the idea that it's a profile. You can go from here and profile settings and switch, make it use a different profile. But the easiest way I find is I simply deselect over here. So now when I start doing it will be the next profile. On the next profile, I want to disable the symmetry, and I want to change my settings edges to 4, only 4 edges, and still using a circle. So now I'm snapping to this, and I'm going to type it in, let's say again 20. I'm going to make it again 20, or maybe could have made it bigger, but okay, that's fine. Now I'm going to close this. So I'm finished with this. I have now 2 profiles. So in order to convert this into a mesh, now we have only a profile. As I explained in the slides, that a profile is just used to do something. So to do something, what we're going to do now, we're first going to fill this. So I'm going to go to utilities, tools, and in tools, there's something called fill polygons. So now I fill this. This is filled. And once this is filled, this is now called actually a surface. It's not a mesh yet, it's a surface because it doesn't have any thickness. You can't really 3D print that. So there's different ways to add thickness. You can add simply a tool called, in Modifier there's something called add thickness, and that could be used for other purposes as well, but for this as well, or extrusion. Before I do this, I want to first do the other pieces of the profile. So I'm going to move on, deselect this, and select this, and I'm going to do the same thing and go to the tools and fill polygons. Now I'm going to extrude these polygons that I've just created. So I'm going to go to the extrusion, that's what we're going to use for now, and I'm going to enter a value of 200 and click enter and then confirm. So you see we have this extruded for 200, you have the basic legs. Now I'm going to go back to this that I'm doing over here, and the reason I do this later because I want to do a little bit more advanced. As you can see, I'm just going to show you something that will not work and then show you why. If I'm going to go now to extrusion, you see I can still extrude 200. There's no other settings over here. I'm looking for more additional settings. And the reason is because even if the entire object is just one face that I selected, actually it's more faces, but it's one polygon, it's still basically, this actually is one, I'm sorry. It shows over here the total from everything and one that is selected. So I've selected over here, it's one face. It's still considered a complete object and the settings are different. So I'm going to click over here on face mode and I'm going to select this face. Once I select this, I still have one face selected, but it's kind of activating from face mode, and in that case it will give me additional settings because these settings, as I said, is dynamic, always updating and based what you have selected. And on face selection it gives me this very nice setting, advanced setting that I'm looking for. What I'm going to do now is I'm going to extrude only by 5 over here, and this gives me very nice settings to add additional options. I can add a lot of cool features as additional options. In this particular case, what I want to add is another extrusion, an additional extrusion, and I'll make it 20. So if we have 20 plus 5, if you think about it, it's 25. In order to make it the same height as this by 200, I need to repeat this by 8. So you see my repeat is 8. Then I click to confirm. And here you go, you have the object created like this. Now it looks the same way, but if I go now back to my wireframe mode, wireframe plus object, you can see we created the steps. These are all 20 and these are all the 5s. And this is very important. Why? Because what I'm going to do now is I'm going to select these pieces. I'm going to select this. I cannot use loop selection here because there's only one segment in each side. So loop selection must have at least 2 to allow it to find the loop. So I'm going to have to manually select them, and it shouldn't take much time. Oops, selected the wrong thing, mistake. So click over here, and okay, now I'm just rotating to select the same thing the other side around. Okay, now I've selected this, I'll go again to my extrusion and show you that I have different settings. See, now it doesn't really look anything good because I need to do over here, there's a setting called the vertex normal. And once I do the vertex normal, it kind of gives me the option to work. It's not just individual, it's even more than that. It's a real advanced feature. And I'm going to make it -5 and I'm going to finalize it. So now you can see this gave me this nice pattern that I just created over here, which is, you know, quite nice. So once I'm done with this, I'm going to select all of my meshes and selecting this, and I'm going to go now to stitch and scoop. This is where I discussed with things that combines. We can combine things, we can subtract one from another, we can have the exclusion and intersections. Kind of the images over here, the icons explain what they're doing. I want a union to combine them all as one object, and I'm confirming it. So now we have this object ready. I'm simply going to rotate them. It's, you see over here we are the X. I want to rotate around the X-axis by 180 degree. And here you go, it stand up. So now once this is done, I can actually delete others. And there's a cool way over here when you have a lot of objects to select, you just go inverse selection. So it selects everything except what I had selected, and I'm simply pressing delete and I'm deleting it. And I'm selecting this again and I go to 3D print. And now you can see I can simply slice this object, and it's relatively fast, takes like just a few seconds. And here you go, it's sliced. So I can start previewing it. I'm going actually to play animation. Now it's very slow. I'm gonna play it as 1000, it'll be faster. And now you can see how this will play. The yellow is the inset. And you have the basic settings over here. You can go to settings to see much more. You see I use ANET A3. If you click on it, you can choose different printers. The first time you open it, you will get to the page of the printers. And we can anytime add another printer, just a short form to fill out. It takes like 5 minutes. If your printer is missing, please just reach out to us. But that's basically it, how you have the slides ready. Then you just download G-code and it's ready to print. So now we're done with this. I want to show a little bit, to show a little bit more tools. And I'm going to create a basic kind of jack-in-the-box animation. So I'm going to go now again with a cube, and I'm going to drag and drop now the cube. I actually would want this to be in the center, because later I'm going to do something in the center. So if I go in the center, you see over here, we have it over here 44, whatever, and -55. I can simply type in 0, 0, but in this case I'm going to click on this feature, which sets it to 0, is center the object. So basically the object is centered now. And I'm going to add now something else, another shape. I'm going to go to spiral, and I'm going to use the shape already created based on these segments, the settings, and I'm going to finalize. And this puts it in the center, so it's actually in the cube, you can't really see it. Now what we're going to do is, I'm going to select again my cube, and I'm going to select the face over here, and I'm selecting the top, and I'm going to go to a tool that it's called in utilities, it's called split. When I'm splitting this off, now you see I have two separate objects, and I can actually move this away, two separate objects. In order to make this manifold to be able to print it, I'm going to add thickness to it. So in modify, there's add thickness. In this particular case, I want the thickness to be from the outside, so I'll make it, let's say 5, and I finalize this. Let's first preview it. Okay, finalized, and what did I do? Save changes, okay. So this is finalized over here. The thickness you can see over here, this is the thickness basically of 5. We add it on this. And I can actually just move this object to show. I'm going to deselect this face and just move it up. So it's basically moved up. You see two separate objects. So now I'm going to select the other object and I'm going to add thickness. But in this case, I want to add the thickness to the inside. So I'm going to make the same thing 5, but -5. So the thickness is added to the inside. Okay, so now I have the basics done of my object that I want to create. Actually, I'm going to create an interesting thing to show. I'm going to create something else. I'm going to go over here to front view. I'm going to go to my 3D sketch, and I'm going to go to text drawing, and I'm going to type in over here, let's say, wow. Okay. And now I'm going to start drawing over here and the word wow. I can use some more precision how to set it, but I want to show actually how I'm going to align this to this object. I'm going to go to utilities, there's something called align. And in align, I'm going to choose which object I'm dealing with. That's why it's good to name it, so you know, but now I know it's mesh 10. I'm going to choose to align it to mesh 10. You see it's not visible because it's in the bottom of the center. I want to align it actually in the middle of the object, and I want to align it in the front of the object. So now it comes to life. Now I'm going to do, I select this plus this object that I want, and I'm going to go in modify. There's something called cut with profile, and we're going to cut this. Now you can see the topology is created beautifully, all of the connections, so it's manifold, and this is cut. So, but how do I select this actually? This is what I'm going to show you in a minute, because if I go faces, let's say if I activate faces, there are so many small faces to select. If I go polygons, this entire thing is a polygon. So how do I select them? This I'm going to show you soon how actually there's another setting in the advanced settings over here that we can do that. So now that I've done the basics, what I need to do, I'm going to activate my animation. Animation activates up, just click on it to open this toolbar, and now I'm going to click record animation. I'm going to record animation, and the first thing that I'm going to do is I'm going to open this box, Jack in the Box. I want to open it around this point. If I'm going to go to, let's say I need to click on this one, I'm going to go to rotate. If I rotate, you see this position, the center will rotate in the center. It wouldn't really give me what I need. So in advanced settings, I have something I can choose of its preset or simple custom gizmo position. That's what I'm going to choose for now. So I'm going to choose to rotate around this, and I'm going to rotate around my X by 90 degree. So this is opened. Now I can close this, and now we're going to move on to, I chose the point a little bit higher, too high, so it opened the gap, but yeah, you can see you can play around with that, with these settings. Now what I'm going to do, I'm going to deselect this. First of all, let's see how we're going to play. I stop animation, and if I play this, you see I have one object thing, and that basically opens up. That's basically what this is doing. I'm going to close this, and I'm going to go now to this point, this object, and I want this to come out as it plays animation. So what I'm going to do is go to scale. I want to scale it up, and that's kind of the way, oops, I have both objects selected, so I have to just undo this. I'm actually not sure how the undo will work in the animation, I'll have to see. But this is, I deselect this, and I'm going to scale this up by itself, something like this. I made a mistake. Okay, I forgot to turn on the record animation. Let's undo this. I stopped it to show everything, and then I forgot to turn on record. So I turn on record animation again, and then I go to scale, and I scale this up. Okay. So this is scaled up. You can see I can make multiple animations, and they will all be, I had stopped it, and they will all come together. You just will have to select the object on what you do. So for example, I'm going to stop it now again, and I'm going to go play. It will show me just the scale, just this up that I'm doing. But if I'm going to select now both objects, I can select this one plus this one. You'll see actually, when I start playing, you'll see it has both options doing, but it's doing it at one time. So if I don't want this to be at one time, I want this to be later, what I'm going to do is I'm going to move this away. So this is happening after the box, but actually I moved the wrong way. You can read over here what we have. I want to move this one first, like this. Okay, so first opens up, and then this jumps out. Okay, so now I'm going to go to selecting this, and this is what I said. I have this way of selecting this. I'm going to select this box, and I'm going to go in the advanced settings. Let's see, I have to turn on animation again, record animation. And in the advanced settings, let's see, I have two objects selected. Okay, so you have two objects selected. So in the advanced settings, there's something called, I have to go to face selection, I'm sorry. Let's turn on, or polygon selection, that's, I think it's in polygon. I turn on over here, yes, there's something called parts selection. So if I have part selection, this allows me to select parts. And this is actually incredible. You can select, for example, just the inside or just this piece. It cuts every piece separately, and you can select what you want. So I'm going to select this piece, and I'm going to color it. I'm going to color this, let's say, whatever, this color. It doesn't show me now the update because it's selected, it shows me the selection color. But once I'll do something like this, you see it shows me the selection. Now I'll select this one, and I'm going to color it differently. Let's see, whatever, I'm just randomly going to choose something. My colors doesn't really make sense what I'm doing, but I'm going to do, again, now select the next one, select this part, and I'm going to color them, whatever. Okay. And now let's select this and this together, and I'm going to color them again. So I'm going to make it something like this. Okay, so I use the same color. But never mind, I can select all of them and play colors, but now for just the point of showing them. Now I'm going to stop animation. I can actually close this also, and I'm going to go now play animation. I'm going to select all of them together, all three objects that I have, so it plays me all of the animations, and I'm going to start playing over here. I will need to align them. So as you can see, this jumps out, and now you can see the color is playing. So what I want is the color to be, so let's see, first I'm going to make this in a different view mode, so you don't see the details. You see something like this will look much nicer. And now I start playing the animation, and I'm going actually to make this faster. I want this to jump out really fast. It will kind of like give a jump out. So I make this shorter, and let's start playing, see what else I can customize. And then the colors, I can move the colors close to each other, and you see this jumps out much faster. And I can actually move it a little bit overlapping over here, start moving out while it's still there. And as you can see, you can start playing, not to have the exact details now, but this plays with this. You can start playing around with positioning everything where you want them to position. So that's basically it. And now once you have done with your animation, you can click over here to save, and you can download them with animation with multiple different type of settings and get your animation out. So yeah, so that's basically it. So this will show you the basic animation. Now one more thing I wanted to show is, in most cases, the things that you have over here are self-explanatory, most tools, but there's certain things that it's difficult to know without showing. So we'll create another video for tips and tricks. And one of them, what I want to show is the Boolean when it comes to drawing. So if I'm going to draw in freehand drawing, I didn't show it before, there is a way of intersecting objects. So for example, if I draw a circle, now I'm going to create, let's say, a rectangle, something like this. This will kind of combine something like this. If I go to eraser mode, and now I create, let's say, another rectangle over here, for example, this will kind of create, oh, I didn't do the eraser, I'm sorry. I did it, but I switched modes, so I switched off the eraser, I think. So if I do something like this, this will kind of start creating the holes, as you can see. And this is basically what eraser is doing. If I create, now you don't see the part, the hole, but if I create something like this inside, this will basically finalize it. You'll see we'll create an object like this with a hole, which is very good. And in general, Boolean-based modeling is very important. With basic objects, you have them stitch and scoop. With drawing in freehand, this is really amazing. When it comes to 3D Sketch and any application, you don't really have this type of setting. So what you're going to do is, if I want to intersect something, so let's say something very basic, I'm going to draw a rectangle, let's say something like this, and then I want to create a line, let's say with symmetry on, so I'm going to create a line from here to here, okay, something like this. Now I want to create like an envelope, and I want to cut out pieces. So in other applications you have something called trim. You would activate a tool trim and then click on pieces. In SelfCAD, you can simply click on this also, and then you can start clicking over here. So I click, for example, these two, and then I click delete. And something like this, as simple as it is. Now you can fill polygons, and you can start playing with anything else you want to do. And this is actually much more advanced, because we have also two ways of selecting. I can select this entire thing. You see this selects a polygon, or these two together, or these, everything until it finds a minimum cycle, it's called. So this is kind of like until it intersects the other two ways. This the same way, or this. Or I can click on edges and start selecting pieces, just this piece. And in some cases, these pieces are very small pieces. Like in the setting, in the drawing, we have option to make how many segments you want in a line. So you can select just small segments and so on. So this is actually much more flexible than trim that you have in other applications. But it's not a trim tool, so just important to know that. You can also combine multiple profiles that do not exist. So I can start drawing again, activate, and this is selected, it will add to the same profile. But what if I add another profile and I want to do them together? Or even you can even create profiles from objects by copying. So let me show you for example. So if I'm going to go over here in this object, I'm going to go to edge mode, and I'm going to go to loop selection, and I'm going to select over here a loop. So let's say over here this loop, and I'm going now to simply drag, copy them. Okay, so we're gonna make, using my touchpad is a little bit difficult for me to kind of activate this. My touchpad's not very good on this. Okay, so let me just make a copy instead of drag. I'll just make a copy. I'm not very used to the touchpad. You can see I'm having sometimes issues. So what I'm going to do now is I have this copy over here. I'm going to move it to the center over here. Okay, so now I have these two objects selected, but those are, you can't really trim now because it's not intersecting. This is a complete object. So what we're going to do is I can select both of them and I go merge. And merge can be used for objects or for profiles as well. And now once I start going over here, you can see I can start selecting these pieces individually. Actually, this somehow didn't intersect the polygon. Let's see. It somehow didn't clip. Oh, okay, they're not together. You see, there's a height between. Okay, now I know why. I've drawn this with a height of 10. If you remember, I set my screen the height of 10. So that's why it's not working. So I have to do now, so it's not intersecting. That's important. So I get it why. So I'm going to go to split this again. I'm going to split this again. And I'm going to go now to this profile and put this also on the floor. Okay, so put this also. Okay, so now it should work. Now both of them are on the floor. Now we're going to select this particular one. And now we're going to go again to merge objects. Now it should work. Okay, now you can see it splits over here. You can see I can select all of these pieces separately. And if I go to edges, actually, you can see that the circle has a lot of small segments. I can start selecting just small segments. So in this case, let's just select, let's say this one, and I'm going to click delete. And you can see we started creating some objects like this. So this is very flexible, but yeah, I've seen many people don't know how it's working, so it's important to point out. There are many other tips and tricks, but for the most part, things would be self-explanatory. Before I let you go, one quick other note is the layout of the application, the flow. So this is very important, and it makes it very easy to find tools. So SelfCAD actually has an amazing UX, UI, user experience, and this is one reason is because everything is duplicated and it reuses the same tools. So you can do with 10 tools that you would do in other applications with 30 tools. Everything is reusable. Most of the tools work in every mode with profiles, with edges, with faces, and in other applications you would have multiple different modes. But besides from that, it has a very logical overview. So you start, if you think about it, you start creating objects. You first create something, and then you modify them and so on. But even when you create, you have some basic creation and then more advanced. So over here you have the very basic create, and even in basic create you have over here a logical divider, because those are a little bit different, where these you can drag and drop plus click to customize. Those you can only customize clicking on it, and it's more advanced. So those are first, and then this is later. After that you have the next level going this way, is you have the drawing, which is freehand, is the most basic way of drawing, and then you have 3D sketch, a little bit more advanced, and freehand is actually unique to SelfCAD. After you create something, you have the basic transformations, move, rotate, scale, and then after that you want to deform something. So it's important to note something about deform. You can see, read the text, what it says, and the icons, it self-explains what it's doing, but one important note is that these deformations do not change the topology structure, how many details you have. So whatever details you have, it will work. With the example I've shown on the drawing, on the slide, that you bend something without details, it wouldn't work. So if you're going to bend this cube now with limited details, it wouldn't work. Whereas in modify, the objective is actually to change the structure. In most cases, everything you see over here on top of this divider will change it in a visual way. Besides adding details, adding or removing details from the object itself, kind of simplify is a version of simplifying and removing details, different than resolution I'll show in a moment, but also has some visual effect, even if it tries to minimize that. And that's what you have in other applications. In case of these tools, cut with profile I've shown before, or add details or resolution I'll show now, those are adding or removing details without a visual effect. So for example, over here, I'm going to add this, let's say number 2. You see, I kind of start adding details, number 4. And now if I'm going to bend this, now you see it will bend quite smoothly because I added the details. But you can see over here I have 1536 polygons. If I'm going to go now to resolution, again, let's actually see how it looks like. You see we have the details, but the details are not needed all over. You see over here this is not needed and so on. So I'm going to go now again to resolution 0. It will remove it. Look, from 1536. I'll make it to 0. It's brought down to 36. Look how much it reduced it. Whereas the simplify object, what you have in other applications as well, will kind of simplify it, but it will kind of reduce a little bit the roundness and so on. It's a different tool. So the idea is that everything on top of here will change it visually, while this will just change the topology without visualizing it, unless you're in wireframe mode. Stitch and scoop is the idea where you already need more than one object, and that's why it's not available now, because you need 2 objects minimum or more to combine, subtract, and so on. Then tools is where you have all of these advanced creation stuff. Copy offset's a very cool tool, similar to what the advanced settings I've shown in extrusion, but it's for copying objects. And then magic fix, again, those fixes objects before 3D printing, and this kind of can make an object into blocks, very nice effects and so on. Utilities are kind of like all of your helper menus. I've shown align tool, snap, and measurements, and guides, all very helpful, similar tools to align and help with objects. Then you have some other helpful tools that act a little bit different. And then you have sculpting, is where you also work with topology, but the idea of sculpting is that you don't really care about the details because you make it such a small tile, such a small details, and then you work with a brush. And you think about it kind of like a Photoshop brushes. You don't really care about topology, you just have brushes that it's working with. And in most applications, it's not combined in a typical flow. Most applications don't have both. And this is like a complete independent application. That's why it's later in the row. Image 3D, what I've shown the slides, a similar way. It's not a part of the modeling flow. It's something unique to SelfCAD, and that's why it's later. Then 3D print, obviously, and animation. Those are different things after you finish modeling. Soon you will have a rendering as well. And yeah, so that's basically it. So it's quite easy to find. Once we add tools, you can always find them in the appropriate positions and so on. Okay, I hope you enjoyed that, and let me know, give me some feedback, and let me know what else you want me to explain. Thank you, and see you next time.